There is a phrase carved into the ancient stones of Egypt that Egyptologists have never fully explained. Zep Tepi, the first time. According to the oldest texts ever discovered in the Nile Valley, there was an age before the pharaohs, an age before human kings sat upon the throne of the two lands. The Egyptians themselves recorded that, in the beginning, in the first time, beings they called the Neteru walked physically upon the earth. They were not metaphors. They were not symbols. They were rulers of flesh and blood and something else entirely. The priests of Heliopolis preserved records claiming these beings governed Egypt for thousands of years before the first human dynasty. The Turin King List, a papyrus so sacred it was kept in the temple archives, documents reign after reign of divine rulers stretching back into ages that mainstream archaeology refuses to acknowledge. And then, according to every ancient source, the Neteru departed. They returned to the sky from which they had come. They left behind only their hybrid children, beings who carried diluted divine blood in their veins, beings who would become the pharaohs of recorded history. For 3,000 years, every pharaoh claimed descent from these original gods. For 3,000 years, the memory of Zep Tepi was preserved in temple inscriptions and sacred rituals. And then Egypt fell. The old ways were forgotten. The temples crumbled, and humanity lost the memory of when gods walked among us. Or did we? In a quiet suburb of Christchurch, New Zealand, a 4-year-old girl named Isla Thornton has been saying things that her parents cannot explain. Things about the first time. Things about beings who came from the sky. Things about a pharaoh who tried to bring them back and was destroyed for his efforts. Things that a child growing up 14,000 kilometers from Egypt could not possibly know. Her mother, Rachel, works at a local florist shop, arranging flowers for weddings and funerals. Her father, James, builds houses, working with wood and nails and the practical concerns of modern construction. Neither of them has any interest in ancient history. Neither of them has ever read a book about Egypt. Neither of them can explain how their daughter knows what she knows. This is the story of what Isla remembers. And if the ancient Egyptians were telling the truth about Zep Tepi, this may be the story of where humanity actually comes from. The first incident occurred on an ordinary Wednesday morning in March of 2023. Rachel Thornton was preparing breakfast while Isla played with building blocks on the kitchen floor. The television was on in the background, tuned to a morning news program that neither of them was really watching. And then the program cut to a segment about a new archaeological discovery in Egypt. The screen filled with images of ancient temple walls covered in hieroglyphics. Isla looked up from her blocks. Her small body went rigid. Her eyes fixed on the television screen with an intensity that made Rachel uncomfortable. "Mummy," Isla said. Her voice was strange, distant, older somehow. "Those are the wrong words." Rachel glanced at the screen, then back at her daughter. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Isla pointed at the hieroglyphics. "Those are the words they made after," she said. "After the tall ones left. The real words were different. The real words had power." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine, despite the warm morning sun streaming through the kitchen window. She turned off the television and knelt beside her daughter. "Isla," she said carefully, "what tall ones are you talking about?" Isla looked at her mother with eyes that seemed to hold depths far beyond her 4 years. "The ones who were here first," she said simply. "Before people were in charge. They were very tall, and their heads were shaped different, and they taught us everything." Rachel did not know what to say. She assumed Isla had seen something on television, perhaps a cartoon or a documentary fragment, that had lodged in her developing imagination. Children said strange things all the time. It was part of how their brains made sense of a confusing world. She made a mental note to monitor Isla's screen time more carefully and returned to making breakfast. But that was not the end. It was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, Isla's references to the Tall Ones became more frequent and more detailed. She spoke about them casually, as if discussing something as ordinary as the weather or what she had eaten for lunch. "The Tall Ones showed us how to measure the stars," she told her father one evening while he was tucking her into bed. "They showed us how the sky moves and how to know when the river would rise." James Thornton exchanged a worried glance with his wife, who was standing in the doorway. "Isla," he said gently, "where did you hear about this?" Isla looked confused by the question. "I did not hear it, Daddy. I remember it. I was there. I watched them teach the priests. The priests had to learn everything because the Tall Ones were going to leave, and someone needed to remember." James felt his throat tighten. "When were you there, sweetheart?" Isla closed her eyes. Her small face took on an expression of concentration, as if she was trying to recall something from very long ago. "Before," she said. "Before I was Isla. When I was someone else. When the Tall Ones still walked with us." Rachel stepped into the room. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Isla," she said, "can you tell us more about the Tall Ones? What did they look like?" Isla opened her eyes. She sat up in bed, suddenly animated, eager to share. "They were beautiful," she said. "Very tall, much taller than Daddy. Their skin was smooth and golden, not like our skin. Their heads went back farther than ours, like they had more room inside for thinking. And their eyes were big and dark, and they could see things we could not see." She paused, her small brow furrowing. "But they were sad," she added. "They were always a little sad. I did not understand why when I was there. But now I think I know. They knew they would have to leave. They knew we were not ready. And they were sad because they loved us, and they did not want to go. If this account is resonating with you in ways you cannot explain, if you have ever felt that human history is older and stranger than we have been taught, you are not alone. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. There is much more to this story, and I want you to hear all of it." Rachel Thornton did not sleep well that night. She lay awake beside her husband, staring at the ceiling, replaying Isla's words over and over in her mind. The description had been so specific. The elongated heads, the golden skin, the dark eyes that could see beyond normal perception. These were not images from children's cartoons. Rachel was certain of that. She monitored everything Isla watched. There were no ancient alien documentaries, no alternative history programs, nothing that could have planted these ideas in her daughter's mind. The next morning, while James was at work and Isla was playing in the backyard, Rachel sat down at her computer and began to search. She typed "Tall Beings Ancient Egypt" and pressed Enter. The results made her blood run cold. Page after page described exactly what Isla had been talking about. The Neteru, the Shemsu Hor, the divine beings who supposedly ruled Egypt before the pharaohs. According to the ancient texts themselves, these beings had come from the sky, established civilization in the Nile Valley, and eventually returned to the stars from which they had originated. Rachel found references to the Turin King List, a papyrus discovered in the 19th century that documented Egyptian rulers going back thousands of years before the official First Dynasty. The list included reign lengths that seemed impossible, kings who ruled for hundreds of years, divine beings whose dominion stretched across millennia. Mainstream Egyptologists dismissed these sections as mythology or numerical errors. But some researchers took them seriously. Rachel discovered the work of Robert Bauval, a Belgian author who had spent decades studying the connection between Egyptian monuments and the stars. In his book, Black Genesis, Bauval argued that the earliest Egyptian civilization had been influenced by beings whose origins were celestial, beings who had left their mark in the precise astronomical alignments of the pyramids and temples. She found references to Zecharia Sitchin, whose Earth Chronicles series proposed that ancient civilizations around the world had been established by extraterrestrial visitors. Sitchin had translated Sumerian texts that described beings called the Anunnaki, who came from the sky and created humanity to serve them. She found the Edfu Building Texts, inscriptions on the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu, that described a time when divine beings called the Shebtu established the first sacred mounds in Egypt. These texts spoke of a homeland that had been destroyed, of survivors who came to Egypt to rebuild civilization, of knowledge that was passed down through generations of initiated priests. Rachel sat back from her computer, her heart pounding. Her 4-year-old daughter was describing something that serious researchers had been investigating for decades. How was that possible? That evening, Rachel decided to test her daughter more systematically. She found several images online and printed them out. Photographs of Egyptian statues, paintings from tomb walls, depictions of various pharaohs and gods. She spread them across the kitchen table and called Isla inside from the backyard. Isla climbed onto a chair and looked at the images with curiosity. Her eyes moved across the photographs, showing little interest in most of them. Pyramids, temples, golden treasures. She glanced at them and looked away. And then her gaze landed on an image of Akhenaten. The photograph showed the famous colossal statue from the temple at Karnak. The pharaoh was depicted with an elongated face, full lips, narrow eyes, and a strangely shaped skull that stretched backward. His body was shown with wide hips, a soft belly, and long, thin limbs. Isla's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face crumpled. Tears began streaming down her cheeks. She reached out and touched the photograph with trembling fingers. "He tried," she whispered. "He tried so hard to bring them back, but they would not come. And then the others killed him and broke his pictures and said his name was forbidden." Rachel knelt beside her daughter. "Isla, who is this? Do you know who this is?" Isla nodded, still crying. "He was the one who remembered," she said. "Everyone else forgot, but he remembered. He remembered what the tall ones looked like. He remembered how they spoke to us. He tried to make everyone remember again. He tried to call them back from the sky." Rachel's hands were shaking. What happened to him? Isla wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "They were afraid," she said. "The priests were afraid. They liked being powerful. If the tall ones came back, the priests would not be in charge anymore. So they stopped him. They erased him. They said no one was allowed to say his name ever again." She looked at her mother with red-rimmed eyes. "But I still remember his name," she whispered. "I remember all their names. The tall ones taught us that names have power. That is why they tried to erase his. But you cannot really erase a name. It lives in the stones. It lives in the blood. It lives in the people who remember." Rachel knew she needed help. She spent the following days searching for researchers who might take Isla's statements seriously without dismissing them as childhood fantasy or recommending psychiatric evaluation. She found academic papers about children who claimed to remember previous lives, She read about the work of researchers who had documented cases where children provided verifiable information about deceased individuals they had never met. And she found Dr. Margaret Whitfield. Dr. Whitfield was an anthropologist who had spent 20 years studying belief systems related to reincarnation and ancestral memory across different cultures. She had conducted fieldwork in India, Tibet, West Africa, and indigenous communities throughout the Pacific. She had published papers on the persistence of past life memories in children and the cultural frameworks that different societies used to interpret these experiences. More importantly, she was based in Auckland, just a short flight from Christchurch. Rachel sent her an email describing what Isla had been saying. 3 days later, Dr. Whitfield responded. She was intrigued. She wanted to meet Isla. The meeting took place at the Thornton family home on a Saturday afternoon in April. Dr. Whitfield was a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes. She wore practical clothing and carried a simple canvas bag. She did not look like Rachel's image of an academic researcher. She looked like someone's grandmother. Dr. Whitfield spent the first hour simply getting to know Isla. They played with dolls. They drew pictures. They talked about Isla's favorite foods and her pet cat and her best friend at preschool. Only after Isla was completely comfortable did Dr. Whitfield begin asking questions about her memories. "Isla," Dr. Whitfield said gently, "your mummy tells me you remember things from a long time ago. Things about Egypt. Would you like to tell me about them?" Isla nodded. She seemed almost relieved that someone was finally asking. "She wants to know about the first time," she said, looking at her mother. "The time before now." Dr. Whitfield leaned forward slightly. "What do you remember about the first time?" Isla closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice had that distant quality her parents had come to recognize, the voice that seemed to belong to someone much older than 4 years. "In the beginning," Isla said, "the tall ones came from the sky. They came in boats made of light that floated above the water. The people who lived by the river were afraid at first. But the tall ones were kind. They brought gifts. They brought knowledge. They taught us how to grow food and build houses and read the stars." She opened her eyes. "They were our teachers," she said. "They were like parents. They took care of us because we were young. Humanity was young. We did not know anything. We were like babies learning to walk." Dr. Whitfield was writing notes in a small journal. "Can you describe the tall ones in more detail?" "What did they look like?" Isla picked up a crayon and began to draw on the paper in front of her. She drew a figure that was clearly humanoid, but not quite human. The head was elongated, stretching backward. The eyes were large and almond-shaped. The body was tall and slender with long limbs. Their heads were different, Isla said as she drew. They had more room for thinking. They could think thoughts that we cannot think. They could see time, not just now, but before and after. They knew things that were going to happen before they happened. She added more details to her drawing. Golden skin, simple clothing, what appeared to be some kind of headdress or crown. "And they lived for a very long time," Isla continued. "Much longer than us. One of them could live for the time of many, many grandfathers. That is why they were so wise. They had time to learn everything." Dr. Whitfield studied Isla's drawing carefully. She had seen similar descriptions in ancient texts, in the accounts of indigenous cultures around the world, in the mythology of civilizations that supposedly had no contact with each other. The elongated skull, the large eyes, the great height, the extended lifespan. These features appeared again and again in humanity's oldest stories. "Isla," Dr. Whitfield said, You mentioned that the tall ones left. Can you tell me about that? What happened? Isla's expression grew sad. They had to go, she said. Something was wrong. Something in the sky. They said they had to go home for a while. They said they would come back when we were ready. She paused, her small brow furrowing. But they did not come back. We waited and waited and waited. The first children they left behind, the ones with the special blood, they became the kings. They remembered some of what the tall ones had taught. But every generation, there was less. Every generation, the blood got thinner. Every generation, we forgot more. Dr. Whitfield exchanged a glance with Rachel. The child was describing something remarkably similar to the ancient Egyptian concept of divine kingship. The belief that the pharaohs carried the blood of the gods in their veins, that this divine blood was what gave them the right to rule. What do you mean by special blood? Dr. Whitfield asked. Isla looked at her as if the answer was obvious. The tall ones had children with human women, she said. Before they left, the children were not all the way tall one and not all the way human. They were in between. And those children became the first kings, the ones who remembered the most. She picked up another crayon and added a smaller figure to her drawing, standing next to the tall one. But each time the kings had children with human women, the blood got weaker. The remembering got less. After many, many generations, the kings were almost all the way human. They could not see time anymore. They could not hear the voices from the sky. They forgot where they came from. Dr. Whitfield leaned forward. Is that what happened with Akhenaten? The king in the picture you saw? Isla nodded vigorously. He was different, she said. He remembered more than the others. Maybe his blood was stronger. I do not know. But he remembered. He remembered what the tall ones looked like. He remembered how to talk to them. And he tried to bring them back. She touched her drawing of the tall one. He made pictures of them, she continued. He told everyone to stop praying to the pretend gods and remember the real ones, the ones from the beginning, the ones from the sky. He built a whole city just for remembering, a city where people would look at the sun and remember where the tall ones came from. She spoke softly. But the priests did not want to remember. They liked their pretend gods. Their pretend gods made them powerful. If everyone remembered the real tall ones, the priests would not be important anymore. So they waited. And when the remembering king died, they destroyed everything. They broke his pictures. They smashed his city. They said his name was forbidden. They wanted everyone to forget. And everyone did forget. Almost everyone. Have you ever felt that there are memories inside you that do not belong to this lifetime? Have you ever looked at the stars and felt a longing you could not explain? Share your experiences in the comments below. You may not be alone in what you remember. Dr. Whitfield conducted 3 more interview sessions with Isla over the following weeks. Each session revealed new details that the researcher found increasingly difficult to explain through conventional means. Isla described the layout of temples she had never seen. She spoke about rituals that matched descriptions found only in obscure academic texts. She used terms and concepts that aligned with ancient Egyptian beliefs, but employed language that a 4-year-old in New Zealand could not possibly have encountered. During one session, Dr. Whitfield showed Isla a map of Egypt. She pointed at various locations and asked if any of them felt familiar. Isla studied the map with intense concentration. Her finger traced along the Nile, moving from south to north. Then she stopped. She pointed at a location in Upper Egypt, south of Luxor. Here, she said, This is where I was. This is where I watched them teach the priests." Dr. Whitfield looked at the location Isla had indicated. It was Edfu, the site of the Temple of Horus, the temple whose walls contained the mysterious building texts that described the first time and the divine beings who had established Egyptian civilization. Isla could not have known about Edfu. She could not have known about the building texts. She was 4 years old. She had never been to Egypt. She had never seen a documentary about Egyptian temples. Her parents had confirmed repeatedly that there was no source from which she could have acquired this information through normal means. "What do you remember about this place?" Dr. Whitfield asked carefully. Isla closed her eyes. "The temple that is there now was not there when I was there," she said. There was a different building, older, made of different stone. The tall ones helped build it before they left. It was a school. She opened her eyes. The priests lived there. They learned the words that had power. They learned how to read the stars. They learned how to remember. And on the walls, they carved everything the tall ones had taught, everything we needed to know, so we would not forget. She looked sad again. But we forgot anyway. Dr. Whitfield made careful notes. The child was describing something that matched current archaeological theories about the Temple of Edfu. Researchers believed that the current temple, built during the Ptolemaic period, was constructed on the site of much older sacred buildings. The building texts themselves claimed to be copies of ancient records that described events from the distant past. Isla was a 4-year-old girl who liked to play with dolls and watch cartoons about friendly animals. She had no way of knowing any of this. The investigation continued through the winter months of 2023. Dr. Whitfield brought in colleagues to consult on the case. A linguist analyzed the terms Isla used when describing her memories. An archaeologist reviewed her drawings and descriptions of temple layouts. An astronomer examined her references to the stars and the sky from which the tall ones had come. The findings were remarkable. Isla's descriptions of the tall ones matched depictions found in pre-dynastic Egyptian art that mainstream researchers had long dismissed as stylized or symbolic. Her references to beings with elongated skulls corresponded to the mysterious elongated skulls that had been found in Egypt and other locations around the world, skulls that some researchers attributed to artificial cranial deformation, and others believed represented something else entirely. Her account of divine beings coming from the sky and establishing human civilization aligned with creation myths from cultures across the globe, from the Sumerian accounts of the Anunnaki to the Dogon legends of visitors from Sirius, to the Hopi stories of sky people who taught humanity the arts of civilization. But it was Isla's specific references to Akhenaten that proved most intriguing. The pharaoh Akhenaten had ruled Egypt approximately 3,400 years ago. He had initiated a religious revolution, replacing the traditional Egyptian pantheon with worship of a single deity, the Aten, represented as the disk of the sun. He had built a new capital city called Akhenaten, modern-day Amarna, dedicated entirely to this new form of worship. And he had been systematically erased from history after his death. His temples were demolished. His statues were smashed. His name was chiseled off monuments throughout Egypt. His city was abandoned and left to decay. For centuries, Akhenaten was forgotten entirely. He was rediscovered only in the 19th century when archaeologists began excavating the ruins of his abandoned city. Why had Akhenaten been so thoroughly erased? Mainstream historians attributed it to religious backlash, the powerful priesthood of Amun reasserting control after the heretical pharaoh's death. But some researchers proposed alternative explanations. They noted that Akhenaten's religious reforms seemed to go beyond simple monotheism. The pharaoh appeared to be trying to reconnect with something older, something that the traditional priesthood wanted to remain forgotten. Isla, who knew nothing of academic debates about Egyptian religious history, had described exactly this. She said Akhenaten remembered. She said he tried to bring them back. She said the priests destroyed him because they were afraid of what his remembering might reveal. The research team decided to conduct one final experiment. They would show Isla images of various ancient Egyptian pharaohs and record her responses. They would present the images without identification and see if she could distinguish between them. If her memories were genuine, she might be able to identify specific individuals she claimed to have known in her previous life. The session took place on a cold morning in June, the middle of winter in New Zealand. Isla sat at a table in her family's living room, surrounded by Dr. Whitfield and two other researchers. Her parents watched from a nearby couch. Dr. Whitfield laid the first photograph face down on the table. "This is a picture of someone from ancient Egypt," she explained. "I am going to turn it over. Can you tell me if you recognize this person?" Isla nodded. She seemed calm, curious, unafraid. Dr. Whitfield turned over the first image. It was a photograph of the golden death mask of Tutankhamun, perhaps the most famous image from ancient Egypt. Isla studied it for a moment. "He was young," she said. "He died young. I did not know him. He was after my time." Dr. Whitfield noted the response and turned over the second image. This was a statue of Ramesses the Great, one of the most powerful pharaohs in Egyptian history. Isla shook her head. "I do not know him either. He was much later, after everything changed." The third image was a relief carving of Khufu, the pharaoh traditionally credited with building the Great Pyramid of Giza. Isla studied the image with interest. "I do not know his face," she said slowly, "but I know his time. This was when the blood was still strong, when the kings still remembered some of what the tall ones taught." She tilted her head. "He built the big mountain, the stone mountain that points to the stars. But he did not really build it. The building was already there, from before. He just finished it. He put his name on it. But the tall ones started it." Dr. Whitfield exchanged glances with her colleagues. Isla was describing a theory proposed by alternative researchers, the idea that the Great Pyramid predated the Fourth Dynasty pharaohs who claimed to have built it. The fourth image was a statue of Hatshepsut, the famous female pharaoh who ruled Egypt during the 18th dynasty. Isla smiled. "I like her," she said. She remembered better than most. She listened to the old stories. She honored the first time. She was a good queen. And then came the fifth image. It was the colossal statue of Akhenaten from Karnak, the same image that had triggered Isla's initial emotional reaction weeks ago. The effect was immediate. Isla's breath caught in her throat. Tears began streaming down her face. Her small hands reached out toward the photograph. "It is him," she whispered, "the one who tried. Oh, I remember him. I remember when he was born. Everyone said there was something different about him. Even as a baby, his eyes looked at you like he could see inside." Rachel moved to comfort her daughter, but Dr. Whitfield held up a hand, silently asking her to wait. "What do you remember about him, Isla?" Isla wiped her eyes, but could not stop the tears from flowing. "He heard them," she said. "The tall ones. Even though they had been gone for so long, he could still hear them. He said they spoke to him in dreams. He said they showed him what they looked like. He said they told him to help the people remember." She hugged herself, rocking slightly. "So he built the city," she continued. "The city of light. The city where everyone would look at the sun and remember that the tall ones came from the stars. He made pictures of them, pictures that showed what they really looked like. The long heads, the big eyes. He told everyone to stop pretending and start remembering. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But they killed him for it. They said he was sick. They said he was crazy. They said he was a heretic. And when he died, they destroyed everything. They smashed the pictures. They knocked down the city. They buried the truth under sand and lies and time. She looked at Dr. Whitfield with those impossibly ancient eyes. And now no one remembers. No one except me. The research team spent months analyzing Isla's testimony. They compared her statements to known historical and archaeological evidence. They consulted experts in Egyptian history, ancient astronaut theory, past life research, and childhood psychology. They examined every possible conventional explanation for how a 4-year-old girl in New Zealand could possess such detailed knowledge of ancient Egyptian history and esoteric beliefs. They found no satisfactory explanation. Isla had never been exposed to the material she was describing. Her parents had confirmed this repeatedly and had allowed researchers to examine their home, their media consumption, their social connections. There was no source from which Isla could have acquired this information through normal means, but the information she provided was accurate. Disturbingly accurate. Her description of the Edfu Building Texts matched scholarly translations that existed only in academic publications. Her account of Akhenaten's religious reforms aligned with current archaeological understanding. Her references to the elongated skulls of the divine beings corresponded to actual physical evidence found at sites throughout Egypt and around the world. And her claim that the Great Pyramid predated the pharaohs who took credit for it aligned with geological evidence that mainstream archaeology had struggled to explain. Dr. Whitfield compiled the team's findings into a research paper. She knew it would be controversial. She knew mainstream academics would dismiss it. She knew her reputation might suffer for taking seriously the testimony of a 4-year-old girl. But she also knew that she had witnessed something extraordinary. She had looked into Isla Thornton's eyes and seen something ancient looking back at her. She had heard in Isla's voice the echo of memories that spanned millennia. She had documented evidence that challenged everything modern science believed about human history and human consciousness. The paper was titled Memories of Zep Tepi, a case study in apparent past life recall relating to pre-dynastic Egypt. It was published in a small journal devoted to consciousness studies and anomalous phenomena. It did not make headlines. It did not change the world. It became one more data point in a growing body of evidence that something strange was happening, that children around the world were remembering things they should not be able to remember, that humanity's past was older and stranger than mainstream history acknowledged. And Isla Thornton continued to remember. As the months passed, Isla's memories began to fade. This was normal, Dr. Whitfield explained. Past life memories in children typically became less vivid as the child grew older. By age 6 or 7, most children had forgotten entirely. But before her memories faded completely, Isla shared one final revelation. It happened on a summer evening in December of 2023. Rachel was putting Isla to bed, going through their normal routine of stories and songs and prayers. As Rachel was about to turn off the light, Isla grabbed her hand. "Mummy," she said, "I need to tell you something important." Rachel sat back down on the edge of the bed. "What is it, sweetheart?" Isla's eyes had that distant look again, the look that belonged to someone much older than 5. "The tall ones," she said. "They did not leave forever. They said they would come back. They said they were going away for a while, but they would return when humanity was ready. Rachel felt her heart begin to pound. When we are ready for what? Isla was quiet for a long moment. Ready to remember, she said finally. Ready to remember where we come from. Ready to remember what we are supposed to become. She looked at her mother with those ancient eyes. They left pieces of themselves in us, she said. In our blood. In our memories. They are waiting. Watching. They want us to grow up. They want us to remember on our own. They want us to become what they knew we could become. She squeezed her mother's hand. That is why I remember, she whispered. That is why some of us remember. We are supposed to tell the stories. We are supposed to keep the remembering alive. Until they come back. Until everyone is ready. Rachel did not know what to say. She kissed her daughter's forehead and turned off the light. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching Isla drift off to sleep. And she wondered. She wondered if her daughter was simply a child with a vivid imagination. She wondered if this was all some trick of neural development, some glitch in a 4-year-old brain that created the illusion of ancient memories. Or she wondered if her daughter was telling the truth. She wondered if there really had been a first time, an age when beings from the stars walked among us and taught us the foundations of civilization. She wondered if the pharaohs really were the descendants of those beings, carriers of diluted divine blood that grew weaker with each passing generation. She wondered if Akhenaten really had tried to reconnect with humanity's celestial ancestors and been destroyed for his efforts. She wondered if the ancient Egyptians had been telling the truth all along. And she wondered if somewhere out there among the stars, the tall ones were watching, waiting for their children to finally remember. If you have made it this far, you understand that this is not just another story about reincarnation. This is about humanity's origins. This is about what we have forgotten and what some of us are beginning to remember. Share this video with others who are ready to question what they have been taught about human history. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. More children are remembering. More evidence is emerging. The truth about Zep Tepi may finally be coming to light. And when it does, nothing will ever be the same. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with preserving knowledge. They carved their most sacred beliefs into stone precisely because they knew that stone endures when everything else crumbles. They built monuments aligned to the stars precisely because they knew the stars would still be there when they were gone. They developed mummification precisely because they believed that memory and identity could survive the death of the body. Were they simply primitive people with primitive superstitions? Or did they know something we have forgotten? The Turin King List documents thousands of years of divine rule before the first human pharaoh. The Edfu Building Texts describe beings who came to Egypt to rebuild civilization after a great catastrophe. The pyramid texts speak of the soul ascending to the stars to rejoin the gods who gave humanity life. Every ancient Egyptian source tells the same story. The gods were real. They walked among us. They were our teachers and our ancestors. And they left. We have dismissed these accounts as mythology. We have explained them away as primitive attempts to understand natural phenomena. We have insisted that ancient people were not sophisticated enough to record actual historical events. But what if we have been wrong? What if the ancient Egyptians were telling the literal truth? What if Zep Tepi was a real period in human history, a time when beings from elsewhere came to Earth and established the foundations of human civilization? What if the pharaohs really were hybrids, beings who carried the genetic legacy of those original visitors? What if Akhenaten really did try to reconnect with humanity's celestial ancestors, and was destroyed by forces who wanted that connection to remain severed. And what if some of us still remember? Isla Thornton is 5 years old now. Her memories of ancient Egypt have almost completely faded. She no longer talks about the tall ones, or the first time, or the king who tried to bring them back. She is an ordinary little girl who likes to play with dolls and watch cartoons and chase butterflies in her backyard. But somewhere in her cells, the memory remains. Somewhere in her blood, the code of the tall ones is still written. Somewhere in her soul, the first time is still alive. And she is not alone. Around the world, children are remembering. They are describing beings with elongated skulls. They are speaking of gods who came from the stars. They are recounting lives from ages that mainstream history says never existed. They are telling us what we have forgotten. They are keeping the remembering alive. Until we are ready. Until they come back. Until Zep Tepi begins again.